The promotion had barely settled when the words hit me, not in private, but broadcasted, public, deliberate. My wife? A freeloader. She's nowhere near my level, he told his friends over drinks, leaning back with a grin that invited laughter. And they laughed. Proud, amused, convinced of his superiority. I sat quietly, stirring my coffee, the sound of their chuckles filling the room like nails on a board. Not one of them looked at me, and in that moment, I realized they didn't just doubt me, they didn't even see me as an equal. A voice inside whispered, "Do you react, or do you let them underestimate you?" I smiled, soft, calm, deceptively placid. I had a choice. And sometimes, the quietest choices are the loudest. Before I share what happened next, I need you to ask yourself, how far would you go if someone publicly humiliated you, dismissed your worth, and assumed you'd quietly accept it? I'm Kennedy, and what you're about to hear isn't just a story of betrayal or pride. It's about patience, observation, and the quiet power of strategy. Because sometimes, the person who smiles the calmest is the one holding all the cards. Before that night, our life had seemed ordinary, me working silently to manage bills, groceries, and the little comforts that kept our home running smoothly. I had always believed marriage was a partnership, that effort and respect were reciprocal, and that love came with shared responsibility. I paid for most household expenses. I arranged our schedules. I reminded him of deadlines, birthdays, and appointments. I smiled when things went right and kept calm when things went wrong. It was exhausting, unnoticed labor, but I thought that was the role I had chosen, the life I wanted to build. Yet, after his promotion, a subtle shift began. Suddenly, my contributions became invisible. I was a freeloader, a liability, someone beneath him, someone to joke about. The very system I had invested myself in no longer recognized me. Friends, family, even colleagues, laughed along, nodding at his statements. The humiliation was not loud, not overt, but precise. It stung because it came in a casual, everyone agrees form. I noticed it first in small ways, the sighs when I mentioned splitting bills, the abrupt change in his tone when talking about shared purchases, the way his friends now referenced me with amusement rather than respect. The cracks were subtle, almost invisible, but I saw them. And I realized that what I gave, my time, my energy, my stability, was being measured only against his ego. Not fairness. Not gratitude. I smiled quietly, inwardly acknowledging, if this was going to be a battle of patience, observation, and strategy, I was ready. The first warning signs weren't dramatic, they were almost laughable if they hadn't been so revealing. He would casually comment on expenses I had covered, phrasing it as a joke to his friends, "She buys things she can't even afford, typical." Laughter would follow, and I would nod, as though acknowledging a truth that wasn't mine. Small things added up. Invitations I extended to friends were dismissed. Suggestions about our household, previously valued, were ignored or met with a smirk. When I questioned a decision or offered input, he would shrug, turning to someone else for agreement, silently signaling that my perspective was irrelevant. The friends, initially neutral, gradually absorbed his tone. Their subtle nods and brief laughs became complicit confirmations. Even the staff noticed the shift, adjusting their behavior to align with his attitude rather than mine. I noticed, of course. Every exchange was documented in my mind, every laugh catalogued. I didn't react outwardly, not yet. That would have played into their assumptions. Instead, I chose observation. I watched patterns emerge, the timing of his remarks, the audiences he sought to impress, the moments when my silence was assumed to be weakness. Humiliation, I realized, is often a game of small, repeated gestures, not the loud confrontation. And those gestures were teaching me more than any argument ever could. By the time the evening ended, I had learned the first lesson: people underestimate what they do not see. And I intended to remain unseen, for now. The next few weeks made it clear that this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, it was a new pattern. At work events, he would casually introduce me to colleagues with a hint of amusement, emphasizing my freeloading tendencies as if it were a badge of honor for him. Friends laughed, co-workers exchanged glances, and I smiled politely, saying nothing. At home, the dismissals became strategic. He would make plans without consulting me, then remark to friends or family, "I just assumed she wouldn't care." Tasks I had once managed effortlessly were now questioned if I tried to intervene. Decisions that had previously been shared were suddenly declared his domain. Even our finances became a theater of control. My contributions, previously routine, were minimized, joked about, or outright ignored. Statements like, "I don't need her help, I've got this," were delivered in public with a grin, leaving no room for discussion. The people around him, friends, relatives, and even mutual acquaintances, absorbed his narrative as fact. They assumed my silence meant submission. They didn't see that every remark, every slight, every joke at my expense was being catalogued. Inside, I remained calm. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't retreat. I simply observed, noting patterns, memorizing sequences, and understanding motivations. Their confidence grew because I appeared passive. That very confidence, however, was laying the foundation for the reversal that was quietly forming in my mind. Humiliation is only effective when the victim reacts the way the perpetrator expects. And I had no intention of giving him that satisfaction. With each passing day, the isolation became sharper. Conversations I tried to start were brushed aside. My opinions were quietly dismissed before they were even fully formed. Even friends began to hesitate, uncertain whether to invite me into discussions or align with his confident assertions instead. He became adept at gaslighting. A comment I remembered making would suddenly be reframed as something I never said, a decision I had taken as joint would be presented as his alone. And each time, my initial disbelief faded into cautious doubt. Had I misremembered? Was I truly overreacting? At first, the sting of humiliation brought anger. But anger, I realized, was predictable, and predictable emotions are easy to manipulate. I held it in check. I held my dignity intact, carefully measuring my expressions, my tone, my presence. Even in quiet moments, when I sat alone reviewing bills or planning my day, I felt the pressure of being unseen, undervalued, and doubted. The mental exhaustion was real, the emotional weight pressing down like a physical force. Yet I noticed something crucial. My observations were sharper than ever. The patterns, the contradictions, the overconfident statements, they were all visible now, clear and measurable. The very actions designed to diminish me were recording themselves for my eventual advantage. So I endured. Not passively, but deliberately. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I didn't make them think they had won. I simply held space for clarity, keeping every detail in mind. Because endurance, when guided by awareness, is not weakness, it is the quiet foundation of power. Then came the evening that everyone assumed would mark my defeat. My husband, confident and smug, had organized a small gathering with his closest friends and family to celebrate his promotion. I arrived quietly, carrying nothing but my presence, already anticipating the dismissive remarks that would follow. He stood in the center of the room, recounting stories of my freeloading behavior, exaggerating minor incidents into supposed proof of my inadequacy. Laughter erupted around him, affirming his narrative, and for a moment, I felt the weight of their assumptions pressing in. One of his friends raised a toast, eyes twinkling with amusement. "To the cleverest husband," he said, "and the wife who couldn't keep up." I smiled politely, nodding as if acknowledging their version of reality. They believed they had stripped me of credibility, that I had no leverage, no agency, no control. Their laughter confirmed it. I could feel the invisible walls closing, the apparent loss of status, the social blow designed to humble me. On the surface, it looked like the end, like they had succeeded in reducing me to their perception. But beneath that quiet smile, I was noting everything, the timing of remarks, the audience's reactions, the precise phrasing used to diminish me. Every joke, every smug glance, every shared laugh was a breadcrumb in the pattern I would later turn to my advantage. The world might have thought I had lost, that I had no power left. But appearances are fragile, and patience is a weapon. I left the gathering with my calm intact, silent, unshaken. The apparent loss was only temporary. The real story had yet to unfold. After that evening, I retreated into quiet endurance. Not because I was defeated, but because I understood the value of observing without reacting. I didn't confront him about the jokes, the dismissals, or the public humiliation. I didn't argue with his friends or correct their assumptions. I simply watched. Every conversation, every glance, every gesture was being recorded in my mind. Patterns were forming, subtle but undeniable. At home, I maintained my routine with precision, paying bills, managing schedules, keeping the household running. Outwardly, I appeared composed, almost serene. Inside, I catalogued every insult, every smirk, every moment they assumed they held power over me. I noticed their overconfidence. His friend's laughter had become predictable. His tone, when speaking to me, now carried a hint of arrogance that betrayed insecurity. Even his casual remarks, intended to dismiss me, revealed the gaps in his assumptions. Isolation and self-doubt might have weakened someone else, but for me, they sharpened my focus. Each slight became a data point. Each joke became a clue. By the time I lay down at night, the humiliation and exhaustion were present, but they no longer defined me. They were fuel. The quiet endurance I practiced was not surrender, it was preparation. I was not powerless. I was observing, learning, and waiting. And when the moment came, patience and clarity would speak louder than any argument ever could. Weeks of careful observation revealed the patterns I had been waiting to see. His arrogance, his need for public validation, the way he framed every conversation to position himself as superior, they all followed a predictable rhythm. I realized that the humiliation wasn't random, it was a performance, meticulously timed to keep me off balance. The jokes, the dismissals, even the subtle exclusions were part of a larger script. And now, having watched quietly, I understood the narrative and how to navigate it. Every interaction became a source of insight. When he bragged to friends, I noted the exaggerations and the half-truths. When he issued instructions at home, I observed the inconsistencies between what he said and what he had actually done. His overconfidence was not strength, it was vulnerability. I also began to recognize my own responses. For years, I had measured my reactions against their expectations. Now, I realized the power lay in choosing when and how to respond, or, more importantly, when not to respond at all. Silence became a tool, patience became strategy, and observation became evidence. By identifying the patterns, I gained clarity. The disarray that once seemed overwhelming now appeared structured, predictable, and exploitable. I could anticipate his next moves, foresee his attempts to assert control, and quietly prepare my countermeasures without ever revealing my hand. The very confidence he displayed to assert dominance became a blueprint for his undoing. Every slight, every joke, every moment of perceived victory was a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. For the first time, I felt a shift. I was no longer a passive participant in their narrative. I was a strategist, fully aware, fully composed, and fully in control of the story that was about to unfold. While everyone around him believed I was quietly defeated, I had already begun gathering my hidden advantage. The same confidence he wielded as a weapon against me had become my blueprint. I started compiling evidence, not for immediate confrontation, but for the moment it would matter most. Emails, receipts, shared financial records, even casual messages that revealed his intentions, all carefully preserved. Every joke, every dismissive comment, every claim he made to his friends or colleagues was noted, cross-referenced, and logged. I also identified witnesses, the accountant who had seen transactions, the family friend who had been present for discussions, even the house staff who could attest to contributions and responsibilities. None of them were asked to take sides, only to remember details accurately, silently. My advantage was invisible. I made no threats, raised no alarms, and kept my demeanor calm, almost serene. To them, I was still the quiet, compliant wife, seemingly accepting their judgment. Yet behind the facade, every move they made, every assumption they relied upon, was being documented. Even casual remarks during social gatherings became evidence. Overconfidence revealed patterns of arrogance and self-incrimination. Their repeated statements and gestures, intended to assert dominance, were quietly building the case against them. This hidden advantage was more than documents, it was timing. Every piece of information collected was part of a precise narrative I was constructing. It would not be emotional, it would not be loud. It would be undeniable. By the time the decisive moment arrived, I would not need to argue, to yell, or to force submission. The evidence would speak for itself, and the very confidence of my adversaries would become their undoing. For now, I waited, patient and composed, fully aware that the power lay in preparation, not confrontation. As I continued to watch and document, I felt a subtle shift within myself. The anger that had once burned so fiercely now simmered into quiet clarity. I no longer sought validation from him, his friends, or even the world. Their judgment, their laughter, their assumptions, they no longer defined my sense of worth. I stopped questioning myself. Every doubt that had crept in during those early humiliating moments was replaced by certainty. I knew my value, my contributions, and my rightful place, not because anyone had acknowledged it, but because I had lived it, silently and consistently. This internal transformation was profound. Where once I might have reacted impulsively to a slight, I now observed with detachment. Where once I might have tried to prove myself verbally, I now relied on strategy and preparation. My calm became my shield, my patience, my weapon. I also noticed the subtle ways in which his arrogance revealed itself. Every boast, every dismissive remark, every assumed victory became a data point. I was no longer just enduring, I was analyzing, understanding, and learning the patterns that would allow me to act with precision. Confidence replaced anxiety. Composure replaced desperation. I realized that power does not require aggression. It requires restraint, observation, and the ability to act decisively at the perfect moment. By the time the pivotal moment arrived, I would not be driven by revenge. I would act from clarity, from knowledge, and from undeniable authority built through patience. I was no longer just the quiet wife everyone underestimated. I had become someone they could not predict, someone who held the ultimate advantage without needing to raise her voice. For the first time, I felt fully aligned with my strategy, my emotions, and my purpose. With clarity and confidence firmly in place, I began the final phase of preparation. Every step I would take had to be precise, measured, and irreversible. This was not a game of immediate gratification, it was the careful orchestration of consequences that would leave no room for denial. I reviewed every document I had gathered, organizing them into timelines that traced his boasts, his dismissals, and every instance where he had undermined me. I cross-checked emails, receipts, and messages, ensuring that nothing could be questioned. Every detail mattered, from the smallest joke to the largest decision. I also planned the audience. The moment of revelation had to occur where it would have maximum effect, where his friends, family, and colleagues could witness the truth unfold. Public accountability would ensure that his arrogance could not recover from the exposure. Meanwhile, I maintained the same calm exterior I had honed over weeks. I continued paying bills, managing schedules, and interacting with him as if nothing had changed. Every action reinforced the illusion that he was still in control, lulling him into overconfidence. I envisioned the sequence of events in my mind. The timing of each disclosure, the order in which evidence would be presented, and the reactions it would provoke, all were calculated with meticulous care. I allowed myself to anticipate every question, every doubt, and every attempt at justification he might make. By the end of my preparation, I realized something crucial. Revenge is only powerful when executed with restraint, when it appears effortless, and when it leaves no ambiguity. My patience, observation, and silent endurance had brought me to a point where the narrative would finally shift irreversibly. I was ready. Every piece in place. Every move anticipated. And when the moment came, I would act not with emotion, but with undeniable precision. The quiet, strategic power I had cultivated would soon speak louder than any boast, laugh, or insult ever could. The day finally arrived. I walked into the same circle where I had once felt invisible, where his friends had laughed at my supposed incompetence, and where he had proudly declared me a freeloader. Everything was familiar, the living room, the laughter, the casual arrogance, but this time, I carried a calm confidence that was impossible to ignore. I had prepared meticulously. Every document, every witness, every subtle observation had been organized to create a narrative that could not be disputed. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I simply allowed my presence to set the tone. He greeted me with a smug smile, assuming I had come to acknowledge his triumph. Friends and family, conditioned by weeks of his narrative, expected the same. The irony was delicious. They believed I was still beneath him, that their jokes and dismissals had succeeded in erasing me from the equation. I took a seat, placed the folder carefully on the table, and waited. My silence spoke volumes. The room, initially filled with casual chatter and laughter, began to quiet as his overconfidence was subtly challenged by the tension in the air. No one yet knew the full extent of what I had prepared. Every step, every glance, every carefully noted detail had been orchestrated to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be unmistakable. For the first time, the arena where I had once been humiliated had transformed into the stage for my quiet, strategic triumph. I wasn't there to yell, to argue, or to prove myself with force. I was there to reveal the undeniable, letting facts speak louder than arrogance ever could. The game had changed. The balance of power had shifted silently, completely, and irrevocably. As I sat calmly, he grew bolder, unaware that his overconfidence was leading him straight into the trap I had prepared. Every boast, every dismissive remark, every attempt to assert dominance became part of the unfolding story that would reveal him completely. He began recounting incidents, exaggerating my failures for the benefit of friends and family. Each word, meant to elevate him, only added to the clarity of the pattern I had documented. His friends laughed, nodding, completely convinced of his authority, while he continued building the narrative of my supposed inadequacy. But his arrogance was blind. He assumed I would react with anger or retreat, failing to notice my measured composure. I did not interrupt, did not protest, and did not plead. Instead, I allowed him to display every misstep, every contradiction, and every moment of self-incrimination. Even minor errors, the dates he misstated, the promises he had forgotten, the responsibilities he had shirked, became pieces of a puzzle only I could complete. He was revealing the truth about himself, brick by brick, while believing he was constructing his victory. As he overreached, confidence turning to arrogance, I prepared for the final moment. I opened the folder, letting the documents, receipts, and messages speak for themselves. Witnesses, already primed, quietly confirmed each claim without needing my words to persuade them. The room shifted. Eyes that had once laughed now widened. Smirks faltered. Every assertion he had made, every joke at my expense, crumbled under the undeniable weight of the evidence. I remained composed, letting the consequences unfold naturally. He was doing the work for me, his hubris, his overconfidence, and his dismissive nature all ensuring that when the truth landed, it would be irreparable. The stage had been set perfectly. His overreach had transformed arrogance into collapse, and I had orchestrated it silently, strategically, and flawlessly. I finally spoke, not loudly, not in anger, but with calm precision. "Let's review the facts," I said, placing the folder in front of everyone. One by one, I laid out the documentation I had meticulously collected, financial records showing my contributions, messages where he had boasted falsely, instances where he had misrepresented situations to his friends, and proof of every dismissive remark he had made in public. The room grew silent, the weight of evidence filling the air. Witnesses I had quietly prepared corroborated every point. They didn't need dramatic statements, their simple confirmations made each piece undeniable. My husband, still grinning at first, began to falter as the inconsistencies and contradictions stacked against him. I remained calm, letting the truth speak for itself. No shouting, no dramatics, just facts, dates, numbers, and testimonies. Each revelation hit harder because it was undeniable, meticulously documented, and undeniable in its precision. Friends and family shifted uncomfortably. His casual boasts of my inadequacy now exposed him instead. The laughter that had once punctuated his superiority disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. The narrative he had built over weeks, based on arrogance and assumptions, collapsed before their eyes. And through it all, I stayed composed. Every glance, every word, every carefully placed piece of evidence had been planned. The culmination of patience, observation, and strategic endurance had arrived. By the time I finished, the truth was clear: he had misjudged me, underestimated me, and relied on overconfidence to assert power. His assumptions were shattered, and the reality of my contributions, patience, and careful planning had been revealed beyond question. The climax was not loud, but it was devastating. Quietly, calmly, I had reversed the balance of power. The room, once a stage for my humiliation, had become the arena of my undeniable victory. The transformation in the room was immediate and irreversible. Friends who had once laughed at my expense now exchanged nervous glances, unsure where their loyalties should lie. Family members, previously convinced of his superiority, began to reassess their assumptions. The laughter that had once reinforced his arrogance vanished completely. My husband's face, once confident and smug, now reflected shock, disbelief, and growing panic. Each document I had laid out, each witness statement, and every carefully noted detail pierced the veil of his assumed control. He realized, too late, that he had constructed a house of cards, and I had been quietly dismantling it from the inside. No shouting or humiliation from my side was necessary. The collapse was his own doing. His arrogance, his overreach, and his repeated underestimation of me created the perfect conditions. All he had built to elevate himself crumbled naturally, under the undeniable weight of truth. I remained composed, watching silently as his carefully maintained image disintegrated. The power had shifted, subtly but completely. The people who had once cheered him now witnessed his downfall, a downfall born not from confrontation but from meticulous observation, strategic patience, and unshakable calm. By the end of the evening, the room had transformed. What had been a celebration of his promotion and my supposed inadequacy became a testament to quiet resilience and strategic power. Every laugh at my expense had been repaid, not with cruelty, but with the clarity of undeniable truth. For the first time, the social hierarchy that had been used to belittle me shifted visibly, permanently, and irrevocably. The public collapse was complete, and my composure had ensured that the victory was both earned and dignified. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded quietly but unmistakably. My husband's friends and colleagues who had once laughed at my expense now treated me with respect, some hesitant, some awed, but all aware of the truth. His credibility, carefully constructed over months, had eroded completely. Within our social circle, whispers began. The jokes, the casual dismissals, and the laughter that had once surrounded him now seemed hollow. People saw clearly who had been patient, observant, and strategic, and who had allowed arrogance and underestimation to dictate their actions. At home, the balance of power had shifted. Responsibilities, previously ignored or contested, were now acknowledged. My role, long undervalued, was recognized not through argument or demand, but through the undeniable evidence of my contributions, patience, and strategy. Even he could no longer hide behind confidence or charm. Each interaction reminded him of the collapse his assumptions had caused, and the knowledge that I had remained calm, composed, and fully in control made the lessons impossible to ignore. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I simply lived within the dignity I had preserved, knowing that justice, quiet, precise, and well-earned, had been delivered. The environment that had once been a stage for humiliation had transformed into a space of respect. My patience, observation, and strategic planning had yielded results that no anger or confrontation could have achieved. For me, the aftermath was not about revenge, it was about restoration, recognition, and the quiet power of composed resilience. Sitting quietly in the calm after the storm, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The humiliation, the doubt, the isolation, it had all been a test of endurance, patience, and strategy. I realized that true power does not come from aggression or loud declarations. It comes from restraint, observation, and the quiet knowledge that every action, every word, and every decision can be leveraged at the right moment. The lesson was clear: those who underestimate others often pave the way for their own undoing. Arrogance blinds people to the truth, while calm, deliberate action builds undeniable strength. I had been pushed to my limits, but in doing so, I discovered the depth of my own resilience. I learned that dignity is not given, it is preserved, nurtured, and defended with strategy, patience, and clarity. And as life returned to its rhythm, I walked forward with a quiet confidence. I no longer needed approval, validation, or recognition. The respect I had earned, silently and strategically, was permanent. In the end, the story was not about punishment, it was about justice, awareness, and the quiet triumph of a composed mind over arrogance and dismissal. The house, the relationships, and the social circle may have been shaken, but I had emerged intact, empowered, and unshakable.